Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to the City of Lebanon's Board and Zoning Appeals meeting, Monday, February the 3rd, 2020. Before we have our roll call, I'd like to welcome a new member, Mark Vanneman. Welcome to the board, and hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay, Kelly, let's do roll call, please.
Okay. Mark Vanneman.
Here.
Bruce Polly.
Here.
Ron Edwards.
Here.
Chad Kiger.
Here.
Lori Gross. Here.
Okay, we have everybody here tonight. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes for the January meeting?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
Second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Kelly, would you? We'll just,
Bruce Polly.
aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Chad Kiger.
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved, thank you. The next item, we're going to switch a couple things around here, and we're going to have the public hearing on docket number 20-07. It's a Habitat for Humanity of Boone County requesting a use variance to construct a single-family resident home. This location is at 1009 Lafayette Avenue. The property is zoned multifamily. Ben.
Good evening, board members. I'll just walk you through this a little bit. You've actually seen requests like this for Habitat in the past. It seems like every property that is bequeathed to them is zoned incorrectly for single-family homes, even though it's been single-family home or something like that for a period of time. So they pull up the screen here, I'll give you an idea where this property is or what the condition of the property is. This is on Lafayette Avenue. As you can see here, it's a very oddly shaped piece of property. Historically, it has had a single-family home on it, although it has been torn down, so there is not any structure that currently exists on the property. But it has historically been a single-family home. That gives you a little bit of an idea of the property boundaries. It's surrounded by a variety of different uses. There are some storage facilities nearby. There's some duplexes. There's some manufactured homes. So it's got a little bit of everything all the way around it, but it is in a mixed-use corridor that has both residential and non-residential uses on it. As you know, what Habitat for Humanity does, they do build single-family homes. So the request tonight is to be able to allow them to build a single-family home on this property, similar to how it's been used historically. As I mentioned, this is zoned multifamily residential, and because there's no structure that exists anymore, there is no grandfathering of uses that were there previously, so it is required to meet all use and development standards associated with the multifamily district, and single-family homes are not permitted in multifamily. So walk through just real quickly the findings of fact related to use variance. The variance used to permit a single-family residence on this property will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. The lot is sized appropriately for a single-family home and will not cause any adverse effects to the adjacent properties. Use and value of the area included will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. The requested use variance will not impact the use and value of the area in an adverse manner. The proposed single-family use of the property is consistent with the adjacent area, which primarily consists of additional residential uses. The need for the variance arises from condition peculiar to property involved. This property is currently zoned for multifamily uses. However, the surrounding neighborhood contains a mix of single-family and multifamily uses. The applicant is requesting the variance to allow the existing development pattern to continue. And the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will constitute an unnecessary hardship. This property, as I said, is zoned multifamily, although it is not sized appropriately to accommodate the uses permitted with the multifamily zoning district. So it would, in essence, be an unusable piece of property if only uses permitted by the zoning district were allowed. And 5, the approval does not interfere substantially with the City of Lebanon comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan designates this property for residential uses. The applicant is proposing a use that is consistent with the comprehensive plan designation. Staff recommends approval of the variance of use request to permit a single-family residential use within the multifamily residential zoning classification subject to the following conditions. And that would be that the applicant dedicate to the City of Lebanon a half right-of-way of 35 feet along Lafayette Avenue frontage of the subject property. This is one of those properties that we have in certain areas of the community where they still own to the center line of the road. So as part of the development of this property, we request that they dedicate that right-of-way to us so we can make necessary improvements to the road and sidewalks, et cetera. Any questions?
the applicant care to step forward and speak?
Hi there.
How are you tonight?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
How are you
Oh,
tonight?
I'm good, how are you? I'm thankful to be here.
Would you tell us a little bit about what's going to happen and so forth?
Sure, so this land, we purchased it last year. It's a very funny shaped lot, like a right angle. But we worked with Ben quite hard to be able to fit a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, kind of a standard house for us with an attached 2-car garage. We made it fit probably within inches. So it fits within the space, it's got the right easements, so it's good. So it's going to work for us, I think, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Questions for applicant?
You've seen me before.
Okay.
Nothing else?
Want everybody, this is a public hearing tonight, and anybody who cares to speak is welcome to speak. You can sit down if you want to. We will limit the time limit to 3 minutes, so anybody care to speak in behalf of Habitat? Okay, we will close the public portion of the meeting. Any questions for Ben or anybody?
I'll make a motion to approve docket 20-07. Following the City of Lebanon Planning staff recommendation, approving the variance of use request to permit a single-family residential use within the multifamily residential zoning classification, subject to the following conditions: that the applicant dedicate to the City of Lebanon a half right-of-way of 35 feet along the Lafayette Avenue frontage of the subject property.
Okay,
I would second that.
okay, we have a motion and a second. Kelly?
Mark Vanneman,
Aye.
Bruce Polly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Motion passed. Congratulations, good luck. Thank you, you too. Okay, next item is a continuance of our January meeting, docket number 20-02, the New Life Recovery, requesting use variance approval to operate a residential facility for the mentally ill. The property is located at 210 Sam Ralston Road. The property is zoned PBC, which is Planned Business Commercial, and is in the Interstate Overlay District. Ben?
Very good. I'll just quickly recap some of the details related to this project from last month, and then walk through then the staff report this month. As you see, it was a little bit different than last month. As opposed to providing a direct recommendation, I provided some guidance and some questions to guide your discussion this evening on how you might approach the findings of fact and approach a potential recommendation, including just some general guidelines as it relates to the Fair Housing Act, how that applies in this case or doesn't apply in some cases, and then how we move forward from there. Just a little bit of quick overview. Property is 210 Sam Ralston Road. It's currently the Quality Inn Hotel, just a little bit north of State Road 32 on Sam Ralston Road. To the north of the building is the former USA Fireworks building. It's now housing a new business. To the south is White Castle. To the west is Interstate 65. And to the east, there is a vacant lot and the Aspire, Indiana facility. Just walking through here, again, the request has been made by New Life. They have approached the property owner about the potential of buying this property in order to convert it to a facility for generally, the general definition is a residential facility for the mentally ill. So they are looking to make some modifications to the interior of the building and provide approximately 100-bed facility for their program. And in terms of the actual changes to the building, they would look to fill the swimming pool and create kind of an activity room and dining hall. And then they'd also have to add a commercial kitchen, again, to accommodate a facility that size. I'll let them walk through. Again, I know you've heard a lot from them last month, a little bit on the operational side here. I'll let the applicant kind of walk through that for you. And I'll focus then on the Fair Housing Act and then how that applies and how we move forward. What I will say initially is the Fair Housing Act does not require you to approve the application. It does not require you to approve every application that comes to you that's based on a protected class in the Fair Housing Act and American Disabilities Act. So that's not what we're here tonight to suggest, is that the Fair Housing Act says that no matter what comes to you has to be approved. What it does say is it has to be given fair consideration to like uses. So if it is, and it's not in this case, but if you're looking at a home, they're looking to purchase a home and put 6 beds in it, the Fair Housing Act says that that's considered like a single-family home and should be permitted anywhere a single-family home is permitted. This is obviously different than that. We're talking about a much larger facility than the typical small residential facility for individuals that might be housed here. So it is. So there is nothing that says that you have to approve it just because they've asked for it, just that they be given the same treatment. So a typical similar residential use, probably the most similar just general residential use would be multifamily apartments. Looking at just from a residential perspective, again, both of them large-scale buildings that house multiple tenants. That type of use is also not permitted in the planned business commercial zoning classification. So if you just look at it from the land use perspective, just the residential use, neither use is permitted here. So in terms of giving consideration to this use, if you just look at the zoning of a similar type of residential use, neither would be permitted. So in terms of getting the same and fair consideration, they would not be permitted in the zoning classification. I did look historically to see whether there had been any precedent that the city had set over time of permitting rezones or use variances related to allowing some type of multifamily apartments within commercial zoning classification. I really didn't find anything, so in terms of some sort of precedent that's already been set, none exists. Also, about the only thing that's somewhat related, before 2000, our zoning ordinance had different zoning districts. We had, at that time, what was called the planned business zoning district that actually allowed both commercial and multifamily uses within that zoning district. And that's primarily how the North Lebanon Street corridor was developed. As you know, there are multifamily uses, single-family uses, and commercial uses all commingled on that corridor. So the idea of commingling residential with commercial is not necessarily a foreign idea, but at that time we had a different zoning in place that allowed both. So that has changed, that's been changed in the last 20 years. So we've essentially separated uses into more distinct zoning classifications for commercial and residential. So that's just generally speaking, from a residential perspective, how that should be considered. And then I can walk through the findings of fact related to that in a second. I did also want to point out another use, again, talking about giving fair treatment, same treatment to similar type uses. I would classify a residential facility for the mentally ill as a long-term residential facility, and actually courts have determined it is a dwelling. Long-term residential facility for the mentally ill, they're being provided treatment. We have other long-term residential facilities that provide treatment to the tenants that are permitted in planned business commercial. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities are typically large-scale, long-term residential facilities that provide treatment to the patients or to the tenants that live there. Those have also been determined by courts to be dwellings from a legal standpoint. So we do allow some dwellings that with similar operational characteristics we have permitted in the planned business commercial zoning classification. So again, if you're looking to still look at similar uses, you could look at just from a pure residential perspective, it's somewhat like multifamily apartments, but it also does have some very similar characteristics to some uses that are permitted with the planned business commercial zoning classification. So now I just take a few moments to walk through some of the findings of fact. The first is the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. The variance of use to permit a residential facility within this zoning district would not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Even comparing it to a multifamily apartments, I don't know that apartments would have any adverse effects on any of those criteria. In addition, we do have areas where those uses are commingled and there hasn't been any adverse effects. In fact, typically, most communities encourage multifamily, large-scale, higher density housing close to commercial areas. And then in addition, if this were considered more like nursing home facilities, large-scale facilities like that are more commercial in nature, those are also permitted and would not have an adverse effect. The use and value of the area adjacent to the property, including the variance, will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. I'm not aware of any evidence that would prove that putting multifamily apartments near to or within commercial zoning district would have any adverse impact on the values of the property. And again, if you're looking at this strictly from a commercial perspective as a use a similar use that is considered a very similar type of use, then it also would not have an adverse effect because it's permitted. Criteria 3, and this is where it gets a little more complicated. The need for the variance arises from a condition peculiar to the property involved. So if you're looking at this as, I'm going to make sure I got my correct staff report, I think I'm looking at the wrong one. If you're looking at this primarily as a residential use, and the need for the condition peculiar to the property would suggest that there's some reason that a commercial use is not capable to put commercial uses on this property. I would say that condition doesn't exist as it relates to a request to put residential there. So there isn't necessarily something peculiar to the property. If you're looking at this more from the perspective this is similar to a nursing home that is permitted on this site, then we'll look at it a little bit differently. We've in fact differentiated these uses and claimed one to be residential and one to be commercial. And the definition of the residential facility for the mentally ill doesn't necessarily differentiate between, say, 6 people living in a house versus 100 people living in a large-scale facility that's more commercial in nature. So there is something, not necessarily specific to the property that's peculiar, but if we're comparing this to a like residential facility that has a commercial character, then it's something that theoretically should be permitted here. And again, here on the criteria number 4, the strict application of the zoning ordinance would constitute an unnecessary hardship. If you're looking again strictly from a residential perspective, the criteria would say that the critical question is, given the classification as a residential use, if it's considered like a multifamily apartment, is it appropriate to consider an existing commercial facility within a commercial corridor for conversion to a residential use that is considered similar to an apartment building? If a residential use should not be considered appropriate at the subject site, or more critically, more appropriate than a commercial use, then there is no unnecessary hardship, as any commercial use would be permissible as an alternative to the proposed. If, however, you're comparing this use to something like a nursing home, which is a permitted use and has more of a commercial feel to it and more of a commercial character to it, then just by the way the ordinance is written, we've created a hardship for this type of use. This isn't a use I would put in a typical single-family zoning classification where these uses are conditional uses. This is much larger in scale than that and would not be appropriate there, and it has to be appropriate somewhere. And number 5, the approval does not interfere substantially with the City of Lebanon comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan designates this area for commercial uses. So again, if you're looking at this from that question I've already asked, if this is similar to a strictly residential use like multifamily apartments, and if it's similar to that apartment building, which is also not permitted in this zoning district, then there is potential that the proposal would interfere with the comprehensive plan. We are changing the character of the property to something that's purely residential. Again, though, if you're looking at this from a classification more like a nursing home, which is a large-scale residential facility that provides care to the tenants, that is permitted and has a more commercial character to it, then it would not interfere substantially with that comprehensive plan. So again, rather than providing a recommendation, I just provided a conclusion for you. I'll go ahead and read. As previously stated in the findings of fact, there is a significant question about whether the proposed use as a recovery home should be classified as a residential use as contemplated in the UDO, or more appropriately as a commercial use due to the proposed programming and scale that's been proposed by the applicant. And also similar to the nursing home uses that are permitted within the district. If the proposal should be considered like a residential use, the proposal must be given the same consideration as any similar residential use such as apartment building or group home type use. These types of uses are also not permitted by right within the planned business commercial zoning district, and all will be required to seek a use variance or rezone to be considered. The evaluation then must be based on whether a residential use, whether a recovery home or similar apartment building or group home use would be appropriate, and in fact more appropriate than approved commercial uses to consider at the proposed site within the Sam Rawson Road corridor. If, however, the nature and scale of the proposed use is more appropriately considered as a commercial use or nursing home or assisted living facility that are permitted within the district, then it would more appropriately fit within the existing commercial corridor, and the finding facts should be considered satisfied. So there's a lot of information to throw at you. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. And Rob, if I've missed anything from the Fair Housing Act or anything related that is also appropriate to consider here, please feel free to.
One question that I have, one of the basic reasons this was continued,
Oh, yes, I didn't address
Tonight.
that. Yeah.
can you enlighten us a little bit on?
Yes. So we were able to dig up, looking at the deed that was provided in the notice for the last month, the acreage that was in that deed was larger than the property as you see it in GIS. What we've been able to determine is that deed was not prepared recently, is a fairly old deed. At the time, I-65 was still a proposed thoroughfare as opposed to an existing thoroughfare. So the deed to the property included the proposed right-of-way for Interstate 65 to the center line of the road. Certainly since that time, the right-of-way has since been dedicated to NDOT. The deed, we weren't able to find any record of the transfer of the Interstate 65 right-of-way to the state. We assume one exists. We'll get that when it's, so the deed did not include anything but any private property other than the existing Quality Inn. It did just also include the NDOT right-of-way that at the time was still private property. So what we'll do, depending on the outcome tonight, the findings and order need to be prepared and recorded. We will clarify that in the legal description that's attached to those findings and order to accept out the NDOT right-of-way for Interstate 65.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
And do we have any residential/commercial type businesses? You had mentioned several different types, nursing home being one of those.
Yeah.
Do we have any of those operating in the planned business commercial?
Yes, up by the hospital.
Okay. Is
I
that
think
the only
there's
part
a couple
town?
of them up by the hospital, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Would the applicant step forward?
Three of us.
That's fine.
We're a gang, so. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Martin Berg. I'm the Executive Director of New Life Recovery Center. A couple things that I heard in Ben's presentation that I'd like to comment on. I'm not an attorney and I know absolutely nothing about zoning, but I do know about addiction, which is primarily what we do there, as well as mental health therapy and treatment. In 1951, the American Medical Association announced that alcoholism is, in fact, a medical disease. A few years later, they came to the realization that addiction to drugs other than alcohol is also a medical disease. So if we're comparing this to a hospital or a nursing home, I see a very strong correlation between the two. The men that we house at New Life are men that are desperately trying to change their lives and become not only good family members and good husbands and fathers, but also good citizens. And I hope that'll be taken into account with this. I don't know how zoning works. I don't pretend to know, but I just wanted to make those comments. I'll turn it over to Alex Cruz.
Hi, I'm Alex Cruz. I was part of the planner with the applicant. We really believe that our facility, actually I should mention, I'm a secretary of our board of directors as well, and would strongly urge you to consider this more of a commercial kind of facility, even though it may house residents. They're actually probably more accountable than any other transients that you might consider stopping and staying at a hotel for a night or two, which if you pay the fee, you get to come and go as you please, and there's probably not a lot of questions asked. I think at our last meeting, Martin had elaborated about plans for security and checking in and secured doors. So these men will have rules in place, stricter than if you just paid $100 to stay the night. Furthermore, if we don't have, if we don't get this approved, we may not have a long-term plan for keeping this vital community resource going. We recently, in the last year or two, sold our facility and have been renting from, I believe it was Forza Commercial Group, which is planning to demolish and reuse the property that we're currently at. So we're going to have to find a short-term fix, but our long-term fix is the hotel. And any concerns with loss in value of the property, any neighboring properties, would probably argue that there may be none, if any at all. It's speculative at best. And plenty of factors can go into the value of the properties around it. If there were plenty of places to build and people wanted to buy the land, they would have bought it already, but whatever is there is not going to be substantially impacted. And would hope that you guys approve our request for a zoning variance.
Any questions for the applicant?
I do have a couple other comments. Last month, the issue of signage came up, and I wanted to let the zoning board know that if we're approved and purchase the property, we would keep the signage limited to the initials NL, our initials, and at a much lower level. We won't have the big sign that you can see from the freeway. We feel that's unnecessary. The only people that would have a reason to come to New Life are people that we've given directions on how to get there. So we don't feel a lot of signage is necessary. So I just wanted to make that clear. So, and as executive director, it's paramount to me to be a good neighbor in the community. I don't want to move into a neighborhood and cause a lot of havoc and so on. That's one of the reasons we were so attracted to the Quality Inn. And I can tell you right now, it'll be the finest recovery residence in the state. There's nothing else that even comes close to comparison in terms of a physical facility. So that's another reason why we're so interested in the property. Yes, sir.
Have you operated anything this large, or do you have any this large now?
Well, I was the co-founder of a place in Westfield called Laverne Lodge. It was smaller, but very, very similar in nature. The only place that compares to what we have planned is a place in Indianapolis called Progress House, and I was on their board of directors for 6 years. It's also a not-for-profit. And they recently, a few years ago, they went from two men to a room to 4 men in a room. We plan to keep it at 2 men in a room. We're not trying to make a big institution. We're just trying to create a very high-quality facility that can help men to make that next step in their lives. So.
You do not have any that this large now?
No.
What will be your maximum number of people?
Approximately 100.
Okay.
These rooms are so big, we could probably get 3 or 4 guys in there without bunk beds, but we don't want to do that. It's that there's a certain point at which it becomes an institution rather than a kind of a more homey atmosphere. And so as long as I'm the director, I don't want to make it into a gigantic place that's we have people in every nook and cranny, so.
Is New Life regulated by a governing body like a nursing home or a children's home would be?
Yes, there's an organization called the Indiana Association of Recovery Residences, and we are certified by them, and we have to not only maintain a high standard of physical conditions, but also record keeping and other activities, so yes. And I should say the clinical part is also, we're certified by the Indiana Department of Mental Health for the clinical part of the program, yes.
Do those certifications require ongoing audits?
Oh, yes,
And
yes.
how often do they do those audits?
2 years.
Every
on
2
each.
years?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Do you drug test on site?
Pardon?
Do you drug test on
Yes,
site?
yes, and very frequently. Anytime a resident goes home for the weekend, and that's a thing they can earn after they've been there a while, that we'll let them first go home for 24 hours and then 48 hours, and it's automatic when they come back, they'll be drug tested, but we'll just do random drug screens throughout the week, and of course, if we suspect anything, then we'll do more. But it's been literally months since anybody's failed a drug screen, so that's quite an accomplishment in a place like this. So we hope, that's just a normal part of doing business. Not everybody's going to be successful. And if somebody fails a drug screen, they're immediately discharged unsuccessfully, and their referral source, who's normally a probation department or community corrections, will be notified immediately, and they'll deal with any consequences from then on, so.
Other than alcohol and prescription drugs, what other addictions are your residents recovering from?
Well, it used to be the big thing in Boone County was heroin a few years ago, but now it's, a lot of the heroin addicts got tired of seeing their friends die, and so they switched to meth, which I can't say is any sort of an improvement, but we're in the process of hiring a medical director who is the only person I've ever heard of who's found a combination of medicines that will actually help meth addicts stay off meth. And so we're excited about implementing that to our program.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Once again, this is a public meeting, and we will hear from the public. Remind everyone, a time limit of 3 minutes. You have something to say first, Ben?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. We did receive a couple of additional letters today that were not included in the packet, and give you an opportunity to review those, so I'll go ahead and read them into the record. The first is from Christine Altman. She's one of the owners of a vacant piece of property in the direct vicinity of the site. I'll go ahead and read that. It says, "Thank you for having my letter of January 6th read into the record at the first hearing held on the above variance request. As you may recall, I, along with 4 other individuals, own the vacant parcel of land immediately adjacent to the parcel currently operating as a Quality Inn hotel. I've received a copy of Ms. Gerard's letter of January 30th, 2020. Please advise the board that I concur with her concerns, analysis, and conclusions. After additional due diligence, we understand that an assertion may have been made suggesting that the variance request must be granted as a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act. We would respectfully disagree. Even assuming that the petitioner and its project qualified for protection under the Act, which we do not concede that they do, the petitioner's request is far beyond a reasonable accommodation at this location for this facility." And they reference then the Fair Housing Act. And it says, can a local government deny a group home's request for a reasonable accommodation without violating the Fair Housing Act? And it says, yes, a local government may deny a group home's request for a reasonable accommodation if the request was not made by or on behalf of persons with disabilities. For example, the group home developer operator, if there is no disability-related need for the requested accommodation because there is no relationship between the requested accommodation and the disabilities of the residents or proposed residents. In addition, a group home's request for a reasonable accommodation may be denied by a local government if providing the accommodation is not reasonable. In other words, if it would impose an undue financial and administrative burden on the local government, or it would fundamentally alter the local government's zoning scheme. The determination of undue financial and administrative burden must be decided on a case-by-case basis involving various factors such as the nature and extent of the administrative burden and the cost of the requested accommodation to the local government, the financial resources of the local government, and the benefits that the accommodation would provide to the persons with disabilities who will reside in the group home. And this says it's a joint statement of the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Justice, state and local land use laws and practices, and the application of the Fair Housing Act. Thank you and the board for the consideration of this objection. Very truly yours, Christine Altman. The other one I received was from Steve Steffel. I believe he is the broker that represents the property that Ms. Altman owns. This was addressed to me. It says, I am the real estate broker representing the owners of the outlet on Sam Lawson Road in front of the Quality Inn Motel. It is being considered for a change of use. I have been a licensed real estate broker in Indiana since 1978 and have been actively involved as a broker and commercial real estate investor since then. We are currently marketing a commercial outlet in front of a motel that has operated continuously there for many years. A fundamental consideration on any commercial property value is how it is zoned and what type of uses surround it. The marketability of our site is currently being improved with the highway-related restaurant, motel, retail, and office gateway project on the northeast corner of this interstate interchange. The non-conforming residential use of the commercial property adjacent to us is certain to reduce the value of our outlet and other commercial outlets on Sam Ralston Road, as well as other outlets on the interchange. We oppose the granting of a use variance to New Life Recovery. Please be certain that all Board of Zoning Appeals members receive a copy of this message before the meeting scheduled for tonight. Charles S. Steve Steffel. Let's make sure those are read into the record.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to try to be brief. I know I've submitted a letter for the record, and I trust you all have had an opportunity to read that because I think Ben circulated it with his packet. My presentation today is intended just a summary of that and a little bit of response to Ben's comments and the petitioners. If I don't get to everything, I've given my comments to you for the most part in writing tonight, so you have those for your record. The board can just say no to this application. As the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice notes in the quote in Ms. Altman's letters, accommodations requested pursuant to the FHA, Fair Housing Act, are not reasonable, or per se not reasonable, if they would fundamentally alter the local government zoning scheme. Also, the FHA only requires equal opportunity in housing. This is not the standard that Ben proposed for fair consideration to like uses. That is not the statutory language. The statutory language is equal opportunity in housing. The applicant is not being denied an equal opportunity in housing because no residential uses currently exist in this zoning district. Without regard to whether they may exist in some other zoning district in the city of Lebanon, that is irrelevant. They do not exist in this zoning district. This is your premier gateway node at the interstate interchange. It is intended for highway uses according to your comprehensive plan, and there is no residential uses whatsoever currently existing in this property without regard to whatever the ordinance may allow. They don't exist right now. So the applicant is not being denied equal opportunity because no residential uses exist in this zoning district. The board should just say no to this application. Such a drastic change in the character or development is a decision that is better left to the legislative body by text amendment or map amendment. If the legislative body meant to equivocate this use to a nursing home, they could have done so. they still can do so. That is still an opportunity available to the petitioner to seek a text amendment to the table, the use matrix, to include this as a conditional use in this zone district, or to change the definition of a nursing home to encompass this. But because the legislative body defined them separately, it meant that they are separate uses and they are not to be equivocated. The board must just say no to this application. This application has not and cannot meet their obligations to satisfy all 5 statutory criteria as set forth in my letter that was submitted on Friday. Among other things, as set forth in the letter submitted by Mr. Steffel, the introduction of residential uses in this area will adversely affect the market value of undeveloped properties in the area. And in rebuttal to what Ben suggested, that there's no evidence that this multifamily uses would adversely affect this area, it is not our burden to prove that they will not, is the petitioner's, to prove that they will. It is the petitioner's obligation to prove that they will not. And the only...
Please wrap it up, please.
I'm sorry?
Wrap it up, please.
Okay. The only competent evidence that, as to the market value is Mr. Steffel's letter. Petitioner has submitted no evidence of unnecessary hardship, which the Indiana courts have defined as evidence that the property cannot reasonably be put to a conforming use because of limitations imposed upon it by the ordinance, and that the land involved cannot yield a reasonable rate of return if used only for allowed zoned purposes. They cannot meet that standard, and for that, this petition can be denied, it should be denied, and it must be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else care to speak at the public hearing? Okay, not seeing anybody step forward. At this time, the public hearing end of it will be closed. Does the board have any questions for anybody?
Ben, I have a question. So before us tonight, they're asking for a use variance
Yes.
as residential, correct?
Well, it's to allow, in our use table.
Okay, it's
the-
not that specific. It's
Right.
to
It's,
allow.
the term is residential facility for the mentally ill. That's the term in our use table, our use classifications.
Any other questions for Ben or the petitioner?
Just a second, let me look here. We have no other that's zoned this way in Lebanon, correct?
Zoning districts that would permit
No, like in the business district.
plain business commercial?
Yeah.
We do, I mean, we have plain business commercial in a variety of locations. The North Lebanon Street quarter is plain business commercial. This area along 32 is, State Road 39. That interchange is also plain business commercial. And there's other scattered locations around the community.
If we are to approve this tonight, can someone else come right across the road and want to do this in the business district, Ben?
In theory, you've set a precedent at that point that, that there should be some consideration. We do have a restriction in there that says that they can't be within 1,500 feet of each other. We have to double check that. I think the state actually says 3,000 feet, but we do have a restriction on proximity to each other.
How does this compare to Aspire again?
So Aspire is across the street. They provide, I mean, they're essentially a medical clinic. They provide the services that New Life provides, but they do not have overnight stays or long-term residential stays. So they fall under more of a medical clinic category that is permitted within the plain business commercial zoning district. So the difference there is that they provide the similar services, they just don't have the residential component.
Okay.
But I guess I'm a little confused. If we would approve this tonight, it would be a use variance for a residential use.
It's for a residential facility for the mentally ill.
Okay. But the other options that you put in there,
Again, it's how you, I think what I presented is how you categorize the proposal. Should this be categorized as a residential use, or more appropriately as something, as a commercial use because of what's being proposed? And also other uses that are permitted within the planned business commercial that could go here, that are similar operationally to what is being proposed.
okay, but the use variance, if we vote this tonight, would be residential versus the other more appropriate commercial. It's designated right now as residential use.
So, yeah, the ordinance right now generally classifies these residential care facilities for the mentally ill as a residential use. There are conditional uses in all of our single-family zoning classifications. So I think, again, I wasn't here when the ordinance was written and how the definitions are very general in our ordinance. They're not very specific, and it's something we probably should address. So it doesn't necessarily differentiate between a house that has 6 people in it versus something that has 100 people in it. I would suggest from a general use perspective that this type of proposal would not be appropriate within our single-family zoning classifications where it's considered a conditional use because of the scale is what's being proposed.
So how would the conditional use enter into this? I mean, would it have to come back before us?
Well, it's not a conditional use in plain business commercial because it's not permitted. So in this case, it is a use variance request to allow a residential facility for the mentally ill.
But it can't be classified as anything else for a use variance right now?
No, well, and again, there's some clarification needed because, let me find it I printed it out. We also have a use in our use table that is institution for the mentally ill rather than residential facility for the mentally ill. And that is a conditional use within the plain business commercial zoning classification. The definition of that is an institution for the mentally ill. So it doesn't describe, I think I learned that in elementary school, your definitions, you don't use the same words in your definitions. So I can't tell you exactly what the definition of institution for the mentally ill is, but that is actually a conditional use in the plain business commercial. So again, I'm not sure whether the differentiation between institution for the mentally ill versus residential facility for the mentally ill is intended to be, because I wasn't able to find a clear definition of what that is. So that there's some question there whether which definition that falls under, and our definitions are not terribly clear.
And that would be something that could be in planned business?
Yes, it was a conditional use. So it's something where theoretically
Yeah.
you would place conditions on it, but yes, it's a different kind of application.
Ben, what is a nursing home labeled as? What's their use labeled as?
The definition, so if it's
tagged in the nursing home, what would it?
it's under, so we separate our use matrix up into residential, institutional, commercial, industrial. It falls under the residential
does fall
part
under
of the
residential?
table. And courts have determined that they are considered dwellings. So it is residential in character because they've court determined to be dwellings. And those are permitted in plain business commercial. There is not, as Ms. Gerard said, there are not any nursing homes on this commercial corridor, but there are in the plain business commercial zoning district in the city.
And if this were approved and the applicant closes it or moves or whatever, everything reverts back?
Yeah, so what I would propose is conditions as I put on every variance of use, and I can read that for you, that it would be that the approval of the variance of use does not run with the land and is limited to this applicant, New Life Recovery Incorporated, and to the proposed use. Any change in the organization providing oversight to the facility or significant change in the operation would require review and approval by the Board of Zoning Appeals. In terms of operation, they proposed 100 beds. If they would come back to say we want to increase that to 200 beds, I would say that would be a change in the operation that would have to be considered by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
Other things you may consider that have been brought up is signage. There is a large pole sign on that property while it's grandfathered, it would not be permitted as a new sign. I would suggest placing a condition on it that pole sign is removed from the property before they're able to occupy.
Do we have any other questions for Ben?
I have a question for the applicant. What, other than this hotel, what other options have you considered?
You want to step forward?
I've looked at large houses, industrial spaces, I've looked at every conceivable commercial property, some residential properties, and there simply isn't much for sale in Boone County, and we would like to keep this located in Boone County and specifically in Lebanon. And this is where we've been for 18 years, and this is where we'd like to stay. So there's not a property I haven't looked at that's been on the market. I probably know more about what's available in commercial real estate than most realtors. So the answer is there is nothing else available that would meet our needs like this. Everything about this is just simply ideal for what we intend to use it for.
Is it feasible to consider building a property that meets exactly your needs?
We did look at that, and for a number of reasons, mainly a time element, we decided to go with this. When I came aboard a little over a year and a half ago, the building we're in now was in the process of being sold. It was just about a done deal. And I started immediately looking for a place, and the board would talk about building, and then they'd talk about buying, and back and forth. And we initially looked at that white building on Indianapolis Avenue, the previous insurance building. Well, that wouldn't work because of the windows, and to meet our requirements, we have to have a window egress for every sleeping room. And so we really looked at everything. Back many years ago, and some of you will remember this, I'm sure, there used to be a wonderful facility out here called Koala. It was it was one of the three big treatment centers in the state back 30-some years ago. And I tried to find it. I thought, boy, that'd be great if it were still available, and I think it's been made into condos or something. So, but when Koala was here, it really kind of put Lebanon on the map, so to speak, with a lot of people, and I think this would do the same thing. So, yeah, it's to answer your question, I've thought about very little else for a year and a half, so.
I understand, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to reemphasize, because the applicant has an immediate need is not necessarily pertinent to the discussion. So this is purely a land use decision based on 5 findings of fact for use variance. So the fact that they need something quickly is not necessarily relevant to that discussion. This is more about appropriate land uses, appropriate discussions regarding those findings of fact.
Well, if there's no other questions, comments, I would like to have a motion.
I'll make a motion. Docket 20-02, as it pertains to Alexander Cruz for New Life Recovery Incorporated. My motion is to deny the request for use variance based on this being a residential facility in a planned business commercial interstate overlay district.
I would second that.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Chad Kiger.
Aye.
Ron Edwards.
Aye.
Bruce Polly.
Okay.
Mark Vandeman.
Motion 3-2 to deny it.
I'd like to add that, I wasn't saying no to New Life. I was saying no to the location. I think it's a valuable service that you provide to the community. And I think that thought is, there's a lot of people that feel the same way. So for the record, this was a tough decision. I think it wasn't easy for any of us.
Appreciate that, and, like I said earlier, we're trying to...
Step up so that everybody can hear you, please.
I said I appreciate your comment, and as I said earlier, we're trying very hard to not to insert ourselves in a residential neighborhood, which Ben tells me, and this is kind of a ironic thing to me, is that we would have had a better chance of getting this approved if it were right in the heart of a residential neighborhood, because then we would be covered by the ADA and the Fair Housing Act. So we will continue to move forward and see where it takes us, but might be in a different community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other business tonight? Okay, I would like a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Give a second, please.
Second.
All in favor, aye? Aye. Meeting is adjourned until March the 2nd.